Fred Bell, the managing director of the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California, has been wearing Tony Shine's bracelet for several years. Captain Shine was lost in Vietnam flying the A-7. In the background is the A-7 Corsair II, as you can see, is under restoration.
We have about 70 aircraft in inventory presently. We're doing a lot of jet restorations like this A-7A behind me. This airplane actually came out of AMARC. It came out of the storage area over in Tucson. We were able to save it. It's actually a fairly rare airplane. It's an A-7A, and I can't figure out for the life of me, Dave, why it didn't end up in a museum, but it finally did. We were able to save it. As far as Tony goes, I think the big thing, what struck me about his story, and I was working on the Miles hangar, getting the Miles hangar ready, which is our Korea Vietnam hangar when we were building it, was, the war at that time was essentially over for the most part. We were in the process of pulling out, and yet Tony went out, strapped the airplane on, went out, and then just didn't come back. And nobody really has ever really figured out what happened to him. His airplane crashed, he was found. But it was just the dedication and the tenacity of our service people that struck me with his story, that he went out and did this. He was eventually found, which is the other piece, which is we never leave anybody behind. And the American military is very aggressive about making sure that we try to not leave troops on the battlefield and get closure for the families. So whenever I'm not, when I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm not feeling motivated, I look at this because he inspires me to continue to go on and to continue to work towards our goals.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Dave Thompson in the Vietnam hangar of the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California, with our POW MIA bracelet display in the background. We received our first bracelet about 5.5 years ago and now have some 1,800 bracelets that have been donated to the museum. This is a permanent, ongoing display, and we would be honored to include the bracelet of any person who would like to have their bracelet seen for many years to come. But I also wanted to honor the people that wore the bracelets. And so we have the pictures of the serviceman as well as the person that wore the bracelet, as well as on those touch screens, the stories about each one. A little story about the person who was shot down, what happened to them, a story about the person who got the bracelet, how they got the bracelet, what it was like. Wearing the bracelet this was not a piece of jewelry. That person on the bracelet became part of your family. Somebody that you cared about, that you prayed for, that you hoped for, that would come home.
Today, people all over the country are recognizing prisoners of war and those missing in action. The Palm Springs Air Museum hosted a special ceremony honoring the men and women who bravely served.
Remembered at the inaugural POW and MIA recognition event at the Palm Springs Air Museum.
I knew when they shot him down, they released his picture and said, "We have this criminal," they called him. And I didn't know until the guys were released that he had died. It makes you realize what you're able to overcome.
We also remember those who are still classified as missing in action.
Lauren Coronado, News Channel 3.
Don Barnett is with us today at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California, with a F-105 Thunder Chief in the background.
I'm the brother of Colonel Robert W. Barnett. He flew the F-105 out of Thailand in his 43rd mission. He was hit by a SAM missile. He is north of Hanoi, and so he ended up with 5.5 years of prison as a result. Around 1970, the bracelets began. Well, also, in Bob's case, we didn't know for over 2 years if he was dead or alive. I purchased my bracelet through Bob's wife, Anita. So I wore the bracelet for 5.5 years. I donated the bracelet to the Air Museum. My mother's oldest brother in World War I was listed as missing in action, and her mother then always thought he was going to come home. So our mother was going through that same stress that she may never see Bob again. I know while he was in prison, I was driving to work one day and I saw a billboard that said, "Let my brother go," and I broke into tears.
Cheryl Benoit is with us today at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California, with the OV-1 Mohawk in the background.
I wore the bracelet of Staff Sergeant David.DAVE, and he was a crew member on one of these aircraft. Long ago, and close to 50 years I think we're coming up to, I purchased the bracelet and wore it during the Vietnam years in his honor, and unfortunately he did not return. During Vietnam, I did volunteer with the USO in Hollywood and Los Angeles, and it was at that point that the bracelets did come out, and I purchased them and took them to the USO, and many of us, the volunteers, wore those bracelets for many, many years. Some people were able to return those to the POWs when they returned. Unfortunately, David's did not, so mine is here at the Palm Springs Air Museum.
Good morning. Jerry Ingalls is with us today in the Vietnam hangar at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California, with the F-4 Phantom in the background.
Right. My bracelet was Captain Dennis Chambers. He was shot down on the F-4 north of the DMZ. We were close friends. We were kind of like brothers from another mother. Roommates at San Jose State, both went through Air Force ROTC together, and pilot training, he was a couple of classes ahead of me, but both at Williams Air Force Base. We were both in country at the same time. I was stationed at Vung Tau and he was at Cam Bay. A week before he got shot down, I had spent an overnight in Cam Bay with him we did a little damage at the Officers Club, but so I wore this bracelet till he was repatriated in 1973. Well, I still have one bracelet, but another bracelet is on the POW bracelet wall here that has been constructed at the museum.
Good morning. Gary Luters is with us today in the Vietnam hangar at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California, with the F-4 Phantom in the background.
I'm wearing a bracelet today for John Bush. John and I were in pilot training together in the 1964 to 65. After pilot training, he went to F-4s, and I went to KC-135, the air refueling tankers. And in 1966, I was flying combat air refueling missions in Vietnam, and John was in Da Nang flying combat missions in the F-4. 1 month before he was shot down in June of 1966, I happened to be in Da Nang and looked him up. We had kind of kept in touch. So looked him up, and we had dinner together, and we talked about the war and how it was going, and then he got shot down a month later. My original bracelet is on display here at the museum.
Today, we are at the lovely home of Chris Mead here in Rancho Mirage, California.
In the late 60s and early 70s, I lived in Fayetteville, North Carolina, home of Fort Bragg. And when I was there, I was a manager of a small branch bank. One of my work colleagues was a dear friend of Mrs. Raymond Schrump. And Major Schrump was captured and held as a prisoner of war for 5 years. When I met Mrs. Schrump, I just anguished for her. She didn't know when or if her husband would come home, and she's the one that told me about the bracelet program. So I sent for several, shared them with friends in Oregon, and I wore that bracelet on my left wrist. And I remember touching that bracelet all the time and praying for Raymond Schrump's safe return. And the day that he did get off that airplane, I remember jumping up and down for joy and crying and being so relieved. I read an article in the Desert Sun asking for bracelet donations, and I couldn't call Dr. Dave fast enough. So I've been very proud to be part of this program.
Good morning. Barbara Wall is with us today in the Vietnam hangar at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California, with the F-4 Phantom in the background.
I got my bracelet probably in the 70s sometime. I had friends that were wearing them. Saw a lot of people with them on. And I noticed that there was something in the newspaper one day, and they had an address that you could send away for. So I did, got my bracelet. It was just very special because it was a way to remember to honor the MIAs and the POWs. It wasn't until some time later that I had learned that he had died in the aircraft that you see behind me and on a mission.
And where is your bracelet now?
It's right here in the Palm Springs Air Museum. They have a display, and I decided to give it to the display because I thought this way everybody would get a chance to see it. And so I thought, what better way, to have that bracelet shared for everybody.
Good morning. David Mendel is with us today in the Vietnam hangar at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in Palm Springs, California, with the POW MIA bracelet display in the background.
It was back in the early 70s, 70 or 71. There was a couple of people that came into our yacht club and were showing us the bracelets and telling us about them, and I thought it was a wonderful idea. I'm former Navy as well, and I do support our troops. So my bracelet was Lieutenant Commander David Cooley, and he flew the F-111B in Vietnam. That's the plane he was in when it went down. I wore his bracelet for about 13 years after that. Joined the museum in 2015, and I met Dr. Thompson, and he told me about his program, and I donated my bracelet. And my wife had 2 bracelets. We donated them all to the museum, and they're sitting here in one of these 2 cases.